What attracts one person to another person? It's actually a pretty complicated question, though it somewhat sounds simple, and yet the research on it is almost boundless. All over the world, people are trying to figure that out. For example, they look into big pictures like what generally attracts a man to a woman and a woman to a man, and then it becomes more specific, like what makes you more attractive? And if you know how to do that, then how do you use that? Well, over the years, after having read thousands and thousands of those pages, I finally figured out there's a way to simplify that. We can actually bring it down into an acronym where we can summarize all kinds of research being done all over the world about what attracts one person to another. Now, why is that important to know? Well, if you're single, you know it's important to know if you want a relationship with another person because you're thinking, what will attract somebody to me? What do I do to become more attractive? I mean, obviously that's part of the situation about how people develop a relationship, right? Right. Or if you're married, you might be thinking, maybe the spark's gone out over the years. I mean, how do we become more passionate toward each other? And does attraction play a role in that? Actually, it does. And if you're having marriage difficulties, then you might be thinking, I think my spouse may be attracted to somebody other than me, or maybe you know for a fact. And you're thinking, how can I become more attractive so somehow I can compete with that other person? Well, it's not really about competition. It's about something different. But you definitely, through the system we're going to be teaching you in this program, can become more attractive. And if you want to think about it in terms of competition, well, you can actually win. And if you're thinking, but you don't know me, well, I don't. But I can teach you the principles. And if you apply those principles, you'll become more attractive than you've ever been. I'm Dr. Joe Beam. Kimberly Holmes, our CEO, is here, and we're going to do this live session of Marriage Helper Live. I guess that's what we call it, right? Mm-hmm. Marriage Helper Live?
Yeah, that's what we call it. That is. So I don't know that I would ever go to Google and necessarily type in how to become more attractive. But me as a woman, I would type in, how do I become fitter? A few years ago, there was definitely a movement towards skinny. Women wanted to be very skinny. Now it's more towards, I want to be more fit. I want to be more toned. How can I look that way? Those are the things that, at least as a woman, I think about. I'm looking for. How can I, ultimately underneath, I'm thinking, how can I be more attractive? And even in my marriage, it's how can we continue to keep the romance up? How can we continue to be attractive to each other so that we aren't becoming attracted to other people? So it's definitely something that is there.
It's important to people that are single, people that are married, people who are married but their marriage is in trouble, people in any kind of relationship. But just as you would have done by typing that into Google, most people think it all has to do with the physical. But
Absolutely.
It's much more in depth than that.
It absolutely is. That's one of the fascinating things I can't wait for us to talk about as we dive into really, first of all, why is attraction important? Let's start there.
Attraction is what draws two people together. I mean, if there is absolutely no attraction toward you in any shape, fashion, or form, then nothing pulls us toward each other, as you might understand. And maybe even you have had a relationship somewhere along in life where somebody felt romantic feelings toward you, but you did not reciprocate. And if they were to ask you about it, or even if you just thought about it, you're thinking, but I don't think about you in that way. What that means is you might be attracted to their friendship, but you are not attracted to them beyond that. If you're definitely going to develop a relationship, then attraction is part of what pulls you together, but it's not just what happens initially. It actually occurs throughout the relationship. You want to continue to be attracted to each other. Now, over the years, the intensity of it can vary and change because various things will change in relationships. But attraction not only pulls you together, but it's part of what keeps you together over the years. And particularly, let's say you're married and you want to have a great sex life, for example. If you become physically unattracted to each other, that's going to decrease your sex life. Oh, but it's not just if you become physically unattracted to each other. If you become unattractive to each other in other ways, it will still diminish your sex life. So what are the ways? We'll talk about those, and why is it important through life? We'll talk about that too. But it's equally applicable, as we've already said, to singles, marrieds, married people in trouble, other kind of relationships that are romantic. Maybe you're dating but not married yet. All those things, attraction remains important.
Absolutely. So where do you want to start?
Well, I want to say that it's not superficial. What I mean by that, you're thinking, oh, it's just about looks, and that's so superficial because looks change. If the attraction were just about looks, then I could understand why you would think it's superficial, because you're thinking they're not looking at the other things. And if that's what you mean by superficial, I agree. But if you're saying that the way you look, the way you take care of your body, all those kinds of things is never important, I would disagree. It's a part of that complex thing called attraction.
Yeah. But that physical is where we start because it's what we see. It's that first thing you notice about someone else before you can really get into the other parts of attraction.
If the relationship starts by seeing each other.
Right.
Now, in the day of the internet, you may develop a relationship without ever having seen each other. But physical still plays a role. But you're right. In face-to-face encounters, it's the first thing that happens, and that's why we typically talk about it first.
All right. So that physical attraction is, again, like you said, it's not that superficial thing, but it's that first thing we see, and it is important. It's not the most important, but it is important to keep up, to keep doing, to keep going throughout your whole entire life.
Now, when you say it's not the most important, we've got to clarify that. What does that mean? It's not the most important.
It's not the most important, in my opinion. It is not the most important aspect of the 4 parts of attraction.
In your opinion. So that's just it. With each individual, things can change and actually change over time. Where this was more important to me at one point, now this is more important to me at this point. So we're not trying to make a judgment about what should or should not be important to you. I can tell you, based on the surveys I've done and the people with whom I've interacted, which one that most people say is the most important, and it's not physical. But we're not trying to say that it's not important to you, because it may be. So maybe it's time to give the acronym so we can start talking about those things.
Yeah. Go for it.
Let's see, you go for it.
So the acronym we use to describe these 4 areas of attraction is PIES. I almost went to the store and just had huge pies sitting here on the desk, but it kind of goes against the purpose of what this whole thing is about. But PIES, P-I-E-S. And the reason we use that acronym is because it perfectly spells the 4 areas of attraction. The first one being P for physical, I for intellectual, E for emotional, and S for spiritual. So again, those 4 areas of attraction are physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And if you're like me and you're hearing this for the first time, you might be thinking, how in the world is the intellect and the emotional and the spiritual, how is that a level of attraction? What does that even mean?
Okay, so let's first give sort of the big picture, if you will. And by the way, if you think we're going to be religious in this because we said spiritual, understand that religion's important. Well, it's important to me and important to many people, but that's not what we're talking about in PIES. We're not talking about religion when we talk about spiritual. Okay, so what are we saying? Okay, another way you could use this, instead of the P-I-E-S, which we use, you could say body, mind, heart, and soul, if you will. And you might be thinking, well, why didn't you say that? Well, it doesn't spell anything. So we use PIES because it spells something and easy to remember. All right, so as Kimberly already said, physical has to do with what physically attracts me to you or you to me. And we're going to get into that. We'll talk about it first because it's the P of the PIES. And then intellectual is maybe not what you think it is. We'll get to that. And emotional and spiritual. So where would you like to start? With the P? And what about the P would you like to say?
So starting with that physical thing, we've said that, or at least in my opinion, there's a lot in the world, there's a lot of emphasis put on this physical part of attraction. A lot of judgment that we can feel comes with us. We feel like we need to look amazing in order to be loved a lot of times. I like that what you were starting to begin with. We feel like we have to compete with other women or with other men or whatever to gain the attention, really, of the person that we have our eyes after. And that's something that never really fades even when you've been married for 20 years, you're still wanting to gain that attention from the person. So a lot of times we focus on the pies, or the P, the physical, and that's kind of where we stay.
Kind of. When I teach on the university level, I teach in the psychology department of a university as adjunct professor. Every semester I'll ask my students, how many of you young ladies ever feel that you compare, at least in your brain, yourself to other women and come out second best? And what percentage of the hands do you think go up?
All of them.
100%, because we live in a culture where that's what we've created. And typically they're thinking physically. Now, if you were to rate people on a scale of 1 to 10, I don't know if there is any such thing as a perfect 10 physically. I really don't. But let's say that you're a young lady, for example, you could be a guy, and you're watching this and you're thinking, but in my mind, I rate myself a 5 or 6. And the people I feel competition with, I would rate a 9 or a 10. They'll always be more attractive than I. That would be if you just looked at the physical. By the way, they will not always be more attractive than you, but at least right now you would say, I can see them more attractive. Physical is important, and it does stay important for a lifetime, but when you start scoring these, we'd give a score like to the P, and then a score to the I, and the E, and the S. We'd give a score to all 4 of those. So let's say the potential top score is 40. If you had a 10, 10, 10, and 10, that would be 40. So don't just think you're going to have a score of whatever the physical is, that's how attractive I am. There's actually going to be a combination of these things. And even if you were a 5 or a 6 on the physical scale, but you were pretty high on the others, you actually become much more attractive than a person that was a 9 on the physical scale, but not very high on the others. So very quickly, what typically draws one person to another, physically speaking? If you're speaking in terms of gender, I'll run through a couple of things really quick because I'm not here really to talk about that so much. But we know, for example, if you start asking men, what physical attribute of a woman do you tend to notice first? Well, you can imagine the answers you get. They're going to talk about things like breast size. They're going to talk about facial features. They're going to be talking about eyes, hair, the way she dresses, the way she acts. Some will talk about her derriere. But it's basically a package. And what they're saying is, I find this person physically attractive because of blank. Let me summarize what's really going on back here that we're not really conscious of when we're looking at another person to see if he or she is physically attractive. I mean, you can look at the research that says that people whose faces are what's the word I'm looking for? When they're
More symmetrical?
Symmetrical. You started with an S, and I completely lost that word there. That if their faces are more symmetrical, people tend to rate them as being more attractive. Believe it or not, I actually read some research that found that chickens find humans with symmetrical faces more attractive. Your government dollars at work for a study like that. But we can talk about that, but it really boils down to this. What we're attracted to, and I'm talking about guys now, I'll get to the gals in a minute, physically speaking, are signs of health and fertility. So for example, clean, shiny hair probably indicates health, whereas dull, brittle hair may indicate sickness. Clear eyes, health. Eyes that are not, maybe sickness. Clean, straight teeth, etc. You see all these things. Complexion, all that stuff. And so what men typically are looking for, whether they realize it or not, is she healthy and could she make a good baby? Now again, that's not happening up here. It's happening back here in this part of the brain. Therefore, in worldwide research, if they show frontal silhouettes of women to men, therefore no facial features, not the breast size, that becomes less important in the silhouette, of course. And they say, which of these silhouettes do you find more physically attractive? The one that's going to win, it won't be 100%, but the one that'll win by far is a waist to hip ratio of 70 to 80%. That means that the woman's hips are about her waist is about 70 to 80% the size of her hips. Some cultures, the hips are larger. Some cultures, the hips are more narrow, but the same ratio, wherever they are, it tends to be the more attractive. Why? It's the ideal proportion for childbearing. And so men tend to notice women for signs of health and fertility, the ability to have their babies. Therefore, a woman who's taking care of her body becomes more attractive than a woman who completely lets her body go, because she not only appears healthier, she probably will be. And therefore the hygiene, the cleanliness, all those kinds of things, the way she takes care of herself. Now the secondary part of that is if she's demonstrating some characteristics that are not as common in the gene pool. Therefore, hair that's truly blonde makes her a little rarer, or truly redheaded makes her a little more, a little narrower in the realm of that many people available with that characteristic. Green eyes, blue eyes, a little narrower. And so we tend to notice those that are not the most common genetic characteristics, but it still has to do with procreation. So that's what typically attracts us to another person, signs of health and fertility. Okay. The second thing from women toward men, it's a similar thing, but a little different in the sense, I should say, not a sin, I hope, but in the sense that they're looking for signs of dominance. I don't mean like these guys are going to rule me. Women don't like that. But in the sense of, is this guy strong? Therefore, taller men tend to be considered more physically attractive. Men with broad shoulders, flat stomachs, tend to be considered more physically attractive. So if you get the picture, physical says, be the best you can be physically. Be in the best health you can be. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, wait a minute, I'm 55 years old. I'm past having children. And you just said men tend to be drawn by that. Yes, they do. Does that mean that men are not going to be drawn to me? No, it doesn't mean that. We'll explain that in a few minutes. But it does explain why, if you're 55 years old and you've got a 65-year-old husband, he still notices the 25-year-old woman in the mall. It's not that he's necessarily a dirty old man. He's just hardwired to think in terms of procreation. That's why he'll see her when she walks by. Now, I'm not saying he should lust and watch after her and things like that. I don't mean that. But that's why he'll see her. It's hardwired. But it still remains important if you're 55, even if you're past the ability to have children, that you still say perfectly is the wrong word, as healthy as you can and in as good a shape as you possibly can at your age and situation in life. Because that's still part of what's hardwired into him. Even if you no longer are capable of having children, it's still what's hardwired into him. And so men and women tend to notice physically people who take care of themselves, understanding that that will vary with age. At 65, you're not going to look exactly the same as you did at 25. Your skin's going to change. Your metabolism's going to change. We're not saying you have to be the eternal youth. That's not the picture I'm painting. I'm just saying that whatever your situation in life is, whatever your age is, that you take care of your body as best you can in that situation and that age, and that makes you continue to be physically attractive. Now, again, if you're thinking, but I'm a 5 or I'm a 4, whatever, I can't compete with those other people, physical is just one piece of the 4, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, just one piece. One of the 4, so 25% if you want to look at it that way. The other ones we'll go into. So the next one is intellectual attraction. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Basically, it's like this. You know this. Kimberly's an attractive young woman. I remember when she was in college and all the different boyfriends that she had, one after another.
Oh, so many. Not at all.
But you probably...
That was Joanna. That was my sister.
Yeah, her sister Joanna actually did have more boyfriends. But if you think about it, there were probably some people, some guys, that when you saw them, you thought they were cute, which is part of the physical attraction. Mm. And you thought, well, I'd like to get to know him better. And even after the first conversation, you thought, oh, good grief. This guy's got a head full of rocks, right?
Right.
Okay. People might be physically attractive, but once you get to know them a little bit, the other parts, the numbers fall dramatically, like intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, and you think, well, there's a nice house, but nobody's living in it. Mm-hmm. So intellectual attraction basically is based on this. We typically want relationships with people that we can understand and that we feel can understand us. Therefore, we tend to be drawn toward people of the same ethnicity, people of a similar age group, people of similar religions, people of even of similar socioeconomic backgrounds, like you kind of grew up similarly, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason we tend to be drawn toward that is because it's like when we talk, I want us to have enough in common with each other that I think that you're understanding what I'm saying and that I'm understanding what you're saying. If you've been to any other country at all and had a conversation with somebody, even if that person spoke English, sometimes you still had trouble understanding each other because your backgrounds were so different. Even if you're using the same words, it's just like we go through different lenses here. We're framing this differently. And so the intellectual attraction says, you are stimulating to me. I get you, you get me. We have enough similarity we can understand each other, but when we communicate with each other, it's like there's real intelligence there. I like the way you think. I like the way you process. I like the questions that you ask. And if we have similar interests, now not all of them have to be similar, but let's say you're both really interested in astronomy, for example, just to pick something out of the air. Then if you can both talk about that, like, whoa, that's really fascinating to me, then that person becomes even more intellectually attractive because it's like we can communicate about things that other people wouldn't understand what we're talking about because they don't have our backgrounds, they don't have our knowledge, they've not studied it like that. For example, I watched you and your husband, Rob. Rob was in the Army, a captain when he got out of the Army, and I watched you guys play war games.
Like Risk?
Like Risk. You have these board games and you play these board games, which is all about strategy, which is really intriguing to him. Well, you've got a high IQ, you're very intelligent. But the fact that you also can understand strategy actually makes you more intellectual attractive to him because intellectually, that's part of what interests him. And if he becomes interested in the things that you're intellectually interested in, so it's having a lot of similarity, but it's having enough similarity, particularly in areas of interest, that you can really communicate with each other on a level that other people can't. Now, if you have some hobby or some level of education that the population in and of itself doesn't normally have, then you know that you typically don't talk about it much in front of other people, right? It's because they don't really grasp all of it. And when you do find a person that knows about that kind of thing, where you can exchange ideas and really get into it, you really find that person more attractive. Now that applies to friendship, obviously, but it also applies to the man-woman attraction. And so the old black and white movies from back in the 30s and 40s with the ditzy blonde, and everybody found the ditzy blonde attractive. Well, she might be physically attractive. She might even be emotionally attractive. But typically you didn't see her as intellectually attractive because it was like, oh, therefore we got the dumb blonde jokes. I am not saying that blondes are dumb. I'm saying that that's the kind of thing those movies created, was the dumb blonde jokes. Well, in this day and time, if you want to be attractive, be the brilliant blonde. Keep your mind learning, keep growing. Now, you don't have to become a physicist. Right. That's not what I'm saying. But it's like, what's going to attract us? When we can talk about something of common interest. And both of us have enough understanding, we can really communicate and keep learning about that.
So when you have a couple and one of them is very interested in, for the example you gave, strategy, a lot of things like that. So if my husband was interested in that, but I had no interest in learning that, so I decided to go this way and learn something completely different. I can't even think of a good example. But I start learning about this, he starts wanting to do more about that, and it continues. I mean, this could work against you where one person follows their interest, I follow my interest because, hey, I'm not interested in that. Why should I care? So it actually could start pulling us away, which then decreases the intellectual attraction we have to each other.
Intellectual attraction. That's correct. If you have nothing in common to really talk about and understand, other than just the normal things of life, like food and children. It could be food if you're both, the kind of people that are kind of into the gourmet stuff. But yeah, you're right. Having intellectual disinterests where that you don't have really anything that you would feel, quote, important, end quote, to talk about, then yeah, it actually could lead you apart. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, what if then I'm single? What should I learn about? Well, right now, whatever's important to you. You don't think, oh, I think that guy's cute. What is he interested in? Let me go learn all about it. That's not necessarily the way to go about it. If you're single, learn about what's interesting to you now, and hopefully what happens is as you start being attracted to people and they're attracted to you, it's those people of similar interests. But you say, what if I'm a spouse and my husband and I are growing apart? Then a couple of things. One is if you know that your husband, for example, is really interested in something that's just really important to him, learn some about it. You don't have to become as much as knowledgeable about it as he is, but learn something about it. But at the same time, you should ask him to learn about some of the things that are interesting to you. Now, if you can find something that combines the two.
Yeah.
Okay, now this probably is not the best illustration, but let's say the guy is into strategy And let's say she really likes competition and is really in the games.
So this is me.
Okay, that's you. So what do? Well, you can play Risk, but what if she's saying that's too much like war? That doesn't really fascinate me. Well, then you go to chess, which is also a game of strategy. So therefore it intrigues him, but it also intrigues her, and they both start learning more about chess. And so you look for the things, either I need to learn something about what's really important to you, not necessarily everything important to you, but what's really important to you, I need to learn something about it. What's really important to me, you need to learn something about it. And if we can find that thing in between, it actually increases our intellectual attraction. And if your husband's pulling away from you or your wife's pulling away from you, then if you really want to do the things that would help lead him or her back, then it definitely becomes important. I need to start learning more about. So if the conversation takes place where he starts talking about astronomy, that when he says that, I'll say, oh yeah, I saw the other night that blah, 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 blah. I don't know if about astronomy to even put an illustration there, but I saw something about that the other night, and the husband goes, you noticed that? Oh yeah, and the reason I found that was intriguing was because blah, 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 blah. And then you're actually having conversations, even when he had stopped talking to you before. It kind of, because you start talking about what's important to him, he sees a different new level of knowledge. Not just him, her. You understand I'm not being sexist here. And that actually can be part of stimulating the conversations that you're not having now, not manipulating, but just learning more about what's important to him or to her. And when it's an opportune time to bring it up where it doesn't feel manipulative, you just mention that.
Yeah.
And then, wow, you start into conversations you didn't have before.
Yeah. And even using that as an opportunity of, hey, I want to learn more about this, if it's astronomy, then you don't have to know all of it before entering into that conversation. Using it as a tool of, hey, I was reading more about this and I don't completely understand what I'm reading. Can you help me? And putting your spouse or the person you're dating or whoever it is in that position to help you and to teach you. Typically when people are excited about a topic, they love teaching other people about it.
Yes, they do, typically. And think about the difference of if you've been sitting next to your wife, and your wife's the big football fan and you're not, and while she's watching the football game, you're reading the book. Think about how much you begin to change your relationship if you start watching the football game and go, oh, wait a minute, the ref missed that call. What call? Did you not see? Because now you know more about the game. You say, this is just kowtowing to the other person. No, it's not. It's about really blending two people in a relationship. We want to have at least some areas where we can intellectually interact with each other and be stimulated. That's what we're talking about. No, it's not manipulation. It's actually consideration. Okay?
Absolutely. And this is one of those areas that people, especially with this intellectual part of it, it can really start going into compromising, into figuring out how to take one person's interest and another person's interest and blend them. But if you can't blend them, then should you give up some time that you're spending in your own and go and spend some time with your husband while he's doing his, while he does the same for you? And a lot of times that can bring huge fights for couples because they're saying, well, I just want my husband to go dancing with me, for example, or the husband saying, well, I just want my wife to go hunting with me. And neither of you will budge because you want your spouse to do the thing with you before you'll do the thing with them. And it can cause frustration. It can lead to bigger problems. There's communication issues that play into that. And that is a perfect time for you to maybe look into getting some marriage coaching. Hey, we want to figure out how to spend more time together. We are letting life take us apart with our jobs, with kids, with stress, whatever it is, and we need to figure out a way to come back together. One of our coaches, Jim Porto, has a quick message for you that we're going to show you right now, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the other two areas of attraction, the emotional and the spiritual attraction. Watch this quick message with Jim.
The other day I was speaking to a client, and one of the things she said to me was this: Jim, have we traveled too far to go back? The answer I'm going to give you may surprise you. I said, yes, you have. Because what we're offering you today is not a going back to what life used to be, but rather a rebuilding of something that maybe you can't even imagine. My name is Jim Porto, and I'm a coach here at Marriage Helper. One of the things that we do as coaching is help you build a vision for your future of the relationship you're in. A lot of times when we go through trouble and situations and we have bad habits, we want to make it work. But we don't want to just put like it was a patch on something new. We want to help you create something new, something that's vibrant, help you create expectations that are powerful. What I'm telling you today is that if you call one of our coaches, they can help you walk through an area, not so you go back to what things used to be, but rather you step ahead into the vision, the hope, and the power that you can have in a relationship that has respect, that has love, that has care. Give us a call here at Marriage Helper. Help us show you how to step into a new relationship today with your spouse.